Hello, everyone. Thank you and for tuning into the Data Center Leadership Podcast. Today we have a really special guest. His name is Bill Lombardi, and he's made the career progression from a economics master's degree all the way up to a chief information officer. And today he's going to share with us some of his insights and vision, his insights that he's gained in this career progression and also his vision for the future. So welcome, Bill. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thanks, Tyler. I appreciate you having me on board.
So first of all, I'd like to start off, and I just want to get started with your mindset. What kind of mindset and general approach in your life and your outlook did you take in getting from an economics degree to becoming a chief information officer?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a long journey, right? This path we take called life. Not to wax poetic too often, but I'm an insatiably curious person. I think, when I came out of an undergrad degree in finance, getting involved with administrative type day-to-day, what I would refer to as rote, replicable processes associated with finance, I didn't find interesting. It was not helping me grow. I didn't think. I put money in the bank, and I've got a lot of friends, mind you, who are in the finance industry and do incredibly well, and it's perfect for them. It just wasn't right for me. So I had gone back to school for a degree in economics. And my interest area was, at the time, environmental and natural resources. So it was a very applied program at the University of Rhode Island. Fantastic, team there, and cross-functionally, a lot of students from international ministries there to learn and understand about optimizing agricultural and fisheries-related industries associated with their countries, as well as natural resources, your ores and your, of course, oil production in those countries. So the economics around there was very applied, as you can imagine. We saw econometric modeling. Linear regression was more common, although there are numerous techniques to approaching a problem. The key, though, that I found, and I've seen it, and have heard it over and over again, is really understanding the theory. If you think about analytics and what it's designed to do, is to tell a story from which you have very limited observational data. And much of that data, as humans, we absorb as sound, we absorb as visual, right?
Yes.
When you think about when you're driving down the road, all of the activities and all of the processing going on that you're not even paying attention to. I mean, I hope you are while you're driving and you're not texting, but the ability of the human mind to process vast amounts of information is just astounding. And so trying to replicate that to the degree possible, to simplify that decision process that goes on, that absorbs all of these different disparate information types, to render an answer to whatever problem it is. Should I take a right turn here? Should I proceed once I come to a complete stop, at the stop sign, to continue down the road in that direction? Those are decisions going on subconsciously, consciously at times. We're starting to see that manifest now in business. We call it analytics. We call it robotics, process, or RPA, dealing with process that is operationalized digitally, if you will. And that's where my passion is: solving problems, trying to operationalize things that are relatively rote for many, and in turn, it improves the quality of their careers, their opportunities. They're doing less of the mundane work, which computers are very adept to solving for, and allows them to get into more what I call creative or value-added insight and application.
Well, You make a good point. So I see what you're saying. So it sounds like you're telling us that we need to, most people starting out may just look at some problems as rote applications of equations, but they need to understand their life and make a story that is going to help solve some real life challenge in order to be successful handlers of information and modelers.
That's exactly right. You know, and where I cut my teeth first was with a company called Information Resources. They serve the consumer packaged goods industry. So think of anything that moves in your grocery stores, drug stores, mass merchandisers. They had vast amounts of data, and this is back 20, 30 years ago, where they were collecting that transaction level detail and harmonizing it across stores within, say, a banner. So, yeah, depending on where you live, Safeway on the West Coast, I think A&P, and Stop and Shop on the East Coast, Midland, you know, the Heartland, Kroger, etc. So if you are a customer, say Pepsi or Coca-Cola, you know, you've got a range of products you can place on your real estate, your shelves, and but what products, what sizes, what flavors, what assortment is important without spending too much to create a viable business. How do you price those products? Where do you shelve them in relation to other complementary products? You know, you can imagine shelving carbonated soft drinks next to dog food. Really wouldn't do well, right? Probably. So chips and other, you know, snackables, if you will, tend to be the common location for that type of packaging, that solution, if you will. Those looking for, you know, entertainment related need states, and they need sodas or beverages and snacks and chips. It's all right there for them. Yes. You know, that just didn't happen, right? It came about through, well, some of it's intuition, obviously. You know, there's certain things that just intuitively clear to everyone. We don't need data to tell us that. It's nice to reinforce that decision, and many people historically have used that, you know, analytics as a way to validate what they believe, or you know, in what I have seen, but less and less, is use data to emphasize the point they want to make, right or wrong. Data can tell both sides of the same story sometimes.
Yes, that's really interesting, and it sounds like with your initial experience, you had the opportunity to work with many customers, and not only many corporate customers, but also to be able to get a better understanding of millions of individual customers.
That's right.
For those corporations.
Right. So exactly, Tyler. Hey, no, if you think about it, analytics is really just a way to simplify a process to understand it. And, you know, predictive analytics will help you understand what levels of certain, I refer to them as attributes, what levels of those attributes drive better outcomes or worse outcomes. Okay, so put it in simple terms. I used to work for Clorox, and, you know, what people don't maybe understand is Clorox also has, or they did back then, Kingsford charcoal, right? Mm-hmm. And so how do you understand how big that market can grow relative to what's going on in that ambient environment? And what I mean by that is you've got to know something about the subject in which you're trying to study, you're trying to evaluate, that you want to learn more about, make sure you're not missing a really important factor. Analytics modeling allows you to do that through a technique called descriptive statistics is one way to go at it. Another is deterministic modeling, where you develop, you know, price elasticities, let's say, where your output is a multiplier of sorts. If I'm to take price up some percentage, what percentage in volume loss would I expect to see, right? And then, so that begs the next question. I'm going to take price up from $1 to $2, let's say. Keep it simple. But I'm going to lose 50% of my volume. Does that make sense? And it really depends on how responsive the consumer is to changes in price on that particular item.
Interesting.
So understanding in the case of, say, charcoal, I guess you don't need to be a rocket scientist to say, if I take price up during 4th of July weekend, chances are I'm going to sell it anyway and make a lot of money, right?
Yes.
That's what conventional wisdom may lead you to if you're a brand person. If you're a retailer, now here's where another concept comes into play. Knowing the ecosystem of the of the product, in this case, analyzing the product sales, in which that plays. So the retailer, they want to drive foot traffic in their store. Kingsford wants to sell more charcoal. And somewhere in the middle, there's an amicable business solution. And so typically, 4th of July, you'll see sales. They're not grabbing margin. And that has to do with other strategies that may be underlying those decisions, founded or grounded in analytics. They know when they, for example, sell charcoal, they sell a lot of steak or hot dogs or hamburgers. And maybe that's where they make up the balance of their margin. So that total market basket, if you will, of analysis is under consideration.
So we need to look at a holistic model based on the consumer's journey through the store and everything that they're going to buy on a trip to decide which key items to raise prices on.
Exactly. Knowing that coming in sets you on the better path for potential success. Doesn't guarantee success, just puts you on that better path. You're including things that may been eliminated, that may be critical in driving the behavior you're trying to emulate, right? So you want to know what those drivers are. We used to call these drivers analysis for short. So what are my drivers? Is it price? Is it weather? Weather forecast in the horizon in, say, the tri-state area in New York, in Connecticut, New Jersey, over the 4th of July weekend, let's say. Meanwhile, you've already pre-ordered your stock, so you're up to the rafters with charcoal, and you're going to have a washout. What do you do? How do you handle that? Do you divert that inventory to sunnier markets? Probably impractical, right? Impractical. So now, this is where having an agile analytic capability at these retail locations, or having some forethought going in when you structure that deal, to have a contingency plan and how you clear that inventory, make way for new, is really important. And so the second phase to the analytics, you've got your kind of predictive models or your deterministic models, as we described. What's your price elasticity? How responsive is my brand or item to promoting? If I promote, should I be in the front of store, back of store? If I promote charcoal, should I be near the meat counter? Or should I be over by the chips and sodas? And so these are what I call naturally occurring experiments that happen globally, that you don't need to necessarily set up in advance if you have that data. And this data does exist.
Wow.
So there, firms out there where you would go ahead and mine for these occurrences, where maybe a set of stores stocked it next to chips and soda, set of stores stocked it next to meat. You do your analytics and simulation and understand, from a total dollars perspective, what does that decision drive? From a total profit, what does that just drive? And if foot traffic was an objective, what does that drive? So when you do go through the analytic process, you do have an intent, right? You have that outcome with an expectation. Before you start analyzing, you should have a reasonable understanding of what the current benchmarks are and what success looks like. As well as, and most people don't take it to this next step, what do I do then? Is the next natural question. Not having that answer will catch a lot of people flat-footed in the consulting industry, or if you're in your first job talking to your boss, walking them through your elaborate analysis and recommendation. Not having that, not having anticipated that.
What you're saying is we not only do we have to have the story, we have to create the right model based on what we think the consumers will want, but then we need to be able to, are you saying that we also need to have a plan for how we present this to the relevant stakeholders to get them to take action?
That's exactly right. And that's a whole nother topic. I'll cover that in a little bit.
Great. Thank you, Bill. So, could you describe that in a little more detail? Once you have your story, your model, like you've described, how do you decide, how do you work within the organization to present the story to the relevant stakeholders?
Sure. Great. I call it a lot of, you do it with a lot of preparation, not to scare anyone. You need to have the fundamentals, right, down. You're looked at as the expert. If you're the in-house analytic lead on a project, and I'll stay with this simple one, since we are in the midsummer, at least when we're recording this, it's top of mind. As you plan your barbecue, we're all consumers as well. And so when I used to bring, new hires in to work with me to take a piece of the business, what I would challenge them first before they would do anything, before they picked up a data element, before they thought about the model, was to get them out in the field and go live it, walk it as a consumer. Walk it through the mind of your consumer. Now, if you think back 30, 40, 50, 30, 40 plus years ago, before the advent of social media and the ability to do these, what I'll call inferential primary research through digital mechanisms, you used to have to field studies. We'd call them ethnographies, where you would sit in someone's home of a typical consumer based on your segmentation and learn about them in a very simple but intimate way. So, I'll draw this analogy because it's important with all the buzz around what's going on with, hacking, the sensitivities around personally identifiable information, the accessibility of platforms like, Facebook and others. If you have a public profile, it's open season, right? So people can learn about you in more what we call precise form, or the segmentation of one, as it's been referred to. So if you think about how most companies go to market, they have a market in mind. They've got a product that fills a need, that need state, whatever it is. I was talking with someone yesterday. Nobody buys, you've probably heard the analogy, nobody buys drills. They buy holes, right? So they want to buy a hole. Do they need it now? Or are they planning for it down the road? That drives your motivation and willingness to race out to the store at that moment to drive a purchase. That also, if it's more of a planning mode, you are also probably going to make a list of other things you need. And so now the amount you spend on that one item has to blend in to your budget amongst all the other items. So the decision is contingent on more variables. That model is going to look a lot different than, say, a convenience purchase. And we see this every day, right? When you go into a 7-Eleven or a Circle K or whatever the C-store of your choice is, items are 30, 40, 50% higher for the same product you could go buy in a grocery store. And if you go into, and when I say price, I mean on a price per volume basis, so a relative price, normalized price for the amount of whatever it is you're purchasing.
Okay, good point. Yeah, that's a good point. You're saying with these models, we can determine exactly how much more can be charged and on which items, it depends not on the consumer's mindset and also on the type of store and what goal it seeks to fulfill for the consumer.
That's right. That's right. What troubles me in today's landscape, or data science, if you want to refer to it that way, I think that's a very loaded term and doesn't really explain what it is. There's certainly science and there's certainly data, but surrounding that is a tremendous body of theory. And that's the piece I think a lot of the media has missed in describing the value of some of these newer technologies. Meaning, you need to understand something about the system, and again, a model, a statistical model or an analytic project designed to describe something, buying behavior in the case we're using, has a purpose. And there's a path that a consumer follows to making their purchase that impacts their willingness and ability to make that purchase at that point in time. Put simply, a couple just real black and white type subject matters. Is it in distribution? If it's not there, I can't buy it. There's only two choices on the shelf. I've got A or B, or C. Actually, I can walk away and not buy anything if you don't have the product I'm looking for. Price is the next one. Is it too high, too low relative to my experience, based on my need state? That's common. We call those demand curves, your individual demand curve, if you remember Econ 101. And that's really at the root of everything, consumer choice and behaviors are driven by. We just get more descriptive. We're peeling back the onion on uncovering what is the motivator, the driver behind that behavior.
So it sounds like when you're talking about data science, you're saying people just get too focused on, there's data and they do science by doing some math, but the real value that's generated in data science comes from an understanding of a theoretical understanding of the given problem, of the subject matter. And that's how we can add value. We start with that understanding and focus on solving the problem. That's more important than the specific numerical models that we use.
My point of view is it's more important. My general theory, I'm trying to remember who said this. I want to say it was Ralph Waldo Emerson, and I'll probably butcher it, but the man who grasps principles, right? In this case, the scenario and all the drivers. The man who grasps the principles can sufficiently select his own method of analysis.
Wow.
So, which brings me to my next point. There are a number of ways to skin that cat. Right? I can take a swag at, let's just say the shelving location of my charcoal. I can take a swag. That's a guess, 50-50. I'm going to be right. I could talk to the store manager, right, who knows that business better than anyone, particularly if he's or she has been on that job in that store, knows his market for a number of years because he's seen the seasonal cycles repeat and repeat and repeat. He knows inherently, innately, what new products are hitting his shelves, how well they're been received, problems he has that we don't see as consumers in terms of getting that inventory on shelf and maintaining it, maintaining its freshness, maintaining its look, its appeal, and pricing. You know, that knowledge that's housed within those that are on the job is really what we're trying to abstract. Now, that scares a lot of people, right? Because then
Yes.
you take it to a logical extreme. Well, why do we need those people then? They're going to, you know, if I give them all the information, how I think, what I see, how I experience, then what's my role, right? And so there's this notion of a threat out there. And, you know, I don't know where I land on that because for me, I prefer to spend more time doing, I'll call it, not higher value sounds a little bit snooty, right? not that it's higher value, but more introspective, to bring more of you into the thought process, to take some of the mundane rote activity off of your plate. And one makes a role that you feel more interesting, and it offers you an opportunity to contribute well beyond, you know, what the day-to-day demand of the job is, filing that report, looking at that analysis, and truly distinguishes you and your value, your ability to differentiate yourself and market yourself in this new era of a data-driven society.
So it sounds like if we understand the problem, for instance, if we, in the consumer industry, if we go and discuss with the customers and the people who interact with the customers more regularly, we can get an idea of what data to look for and then decide if their statements are actually upheld by the data. Then we can make a convincing argument to the upper management to make organizational changes that increase profits.
We can make an argument to senior management. I will dig there. Can you convince them? No. You're not going to convince anyone of anything they're not ready for, right?
Wow.
And that is just, that's psychology, right? So despite the robustness and the integrity of the mathematics supporting your decision, people still want to believe what they want to believe at times. It's relative to their frame of reference, to their experiences over life. And I'm not necessarily stating that they're ignoring the facts. As an economist, I always kind of come at these, what I'll call management challenges, trying to evoke deeper, more grounded, consistent analytic practices and approaches to answering problems versus the subjectivity that occurs. And don't get me wrong, there is tremendous value to the anecdotal personal experience of the senior executive communities and managers and people on the ground that are your frontline managers in whatever endeavor you're in. The challenge is there's an economic incentive to keep your job, put simply, right?
Yes.
And anything that's perceived as a threat, well, you may get a lot of what I'll call lip service, a lot of nods, and but no action. And that's huge. And over the last 20, 30 years, you know, with the advent of that BI push, right, the business intelligence push, dashboard reporting, all of the great work that was done to bring information to life really wasn't as intelligent as it proclaimed. It was data reporting in a, you know, virtual environment that allowed you to consume that information on demand and, you know, from your laptop, from your phone, etc. But it wasn't really a design that learned and acted on rules that you've set in place. That evolved. So, performance optimization, rules-based designs, have matriculated over the years. Where we're getting to, though, is a place that senses, reasons, and responds in near real time. And so think about Siri, and how that experience as a consumer really draws you in, right? The timing and responsiveness is a real critical piece to that. If you said, "Hey Siri," and Siri doesn't get back to you in 2 minutes, that's not a good thing, right? So you need the technology to speed it up, right? So we're at the place where we had the technology finally, and Apple saw that and brought, I'll call it, the entire orchestra together of technology, knowledge, and the processing power of delivering that message in a way that consumers expect, want, or more importantly, are used to or accustomed to receiving it, just like in a natural two-way conversation.
So I think I'm understanding two things from what you're saying. One is that we have a massive computational power now to where we could almost predict what customers want and give it to them as they're living in general. And the other is that when we go to create these models, not only do we need to understand the consumers and the people who often work with the consumers, but maybe as we start fielding some ideas for our potential solutions, it may be a good idea to discuss them with the upper managers to see if they're ready for them as we decide what to do. And that could be a key differentiating factor in our how often we're successful at driving these business decisions.
You've got it.
That's a really valuable insight. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. One of the whether it's formal or informal, one of the approaches I found useful was to go through and conduct a maturity assessment of when I'm consulting my client, when I'm working for a company, the organization at large. And that's a very comprehensive, doesn't have to be extensive, but it from breadth perspective, it needs to address the skill sets of the people and the culture and economic incentives that drive their behavior, because they're following a process that has been time tested in the organization, is embraced up and down the chain of command. And when we talk about analytics, we're not talking about a widget. And I think that misnomer is what has stalled the adoption of advanced analytic processes in mainstream enterprise. But we're seeing that change in the last 10 years. And what I mean by that is there's a cultural shift that needs to occur within the mindset of the organization, a willingness to adapt today's processes to accommodate new information that's born of the analytic process that was just not available before. And as a result, that can skip steps in a current process, remove complete operations out of that. It become automated, say data cleansing and harmonization, right? Partitioning and ejecting redundancies in data. So now you're saving space, time, money for the organization. The ability to cut time out of your movement reports or your daily sales reports, whatever that pulse check is on the state of the business that executives look at, either weekly or daily, depending on their role. how many orders went over the door, how many problems came back, etc.
Wow, that's really amazing. I mean, we need to understand the organization's maturity as we decide the level of complexity of solution and the level of change that we're going to plan to create. And by understanding that, we can maximize the rate at which we innovate within the company.
Man, you could have wrote this. Yes.
Wow, that's amazing.
So that's really important to understand. And, I'll give you an example. With Clorox, I was brought in, I think it was, God, I'm dating myself now, back in 04, 05, somewhere in that era. And they were bringing in-house the ability to measure and monitor and predict the value of each of their marketing mix drivers. So if that's new language for those listening, marketing mix are those big drivers of sales. Typically, at least back then, was traditional advertising, right? Print, TV, radio, out of home, now digital. Segmentations of that, if you had ethnic markets you were trying to reach, or different market channels, maybe, let's say, Home Depot, for example, you have a traditional residential consumer market, but you also have commercial contractors. Each of those are separate markets, and you'd want to treat them differently, maybe. In this case, they do. And the way you gauge services and think about critical success factors around programs geared towards either of those two segments, those two will often differ as well. They're on different cycles, purchase cycles. They're influenced by different micro and macroeconomic factors. And so understanding all of this allows you to test those hypotheses. One, are they impactful? Okay. Two, if they're impactful, how impactful are they? Do I care? Basically, right? The third one, they're impactful, they're significant, so I care. The third question is, can I do anything about it? Is it in my control to address a competitor or competitive action? If I'm Home Depot and Lowe's throws a promotion, what can I really do? Can I plan for it? Possibly. There's some game theory you can apply if you had more information. But fundamentally, you want to focus on what you have in your sphere of influence. You want to understand the magnitude of that impact and how much of what you invest returns value, if that makes sense. So advertising, for example, is a pretty expensive proposition, right? Unless you have an off-the-shelf, let's just say 30-second slot, and you want to boost your demand for next month because you're nearing quarter end, and this is a common one. We're nearing quarter end. I either got to take money to the bottom line or I've got to drive top line revenue. The quickest way to drive top line revenue is to give product away sometimes. At least that's what you see. Wow. You're seeing less and less of that, largely due to the benefit of analytics. People are able to critically assess the value of discounting. And in some brands, some markets, some categories, the role of the brand in that category is at a top tier, middle tier, bottom tier. All of those come into play and will drive very different outcomes. If your objective is to optimize dollar sales versus profitability versus maybe your volumes. So the better detail you have, the more comfort you're able to build across decision makers in the organization and the executives, the better you will drive adoption and impact change.
Wow. So we really need to understand the fundamentals. It's the most critical thing, to understand the fundamentals of the consumer and present that.
That's right.
And also of the like the market, the sale, the corporate environment, like the store environment as well. Basically every major detail related to the consumer and your audience.
You got it. It's a strategic tool. Analytics is a strategic toolkit. And I think the media hype, because a lot of this stuff is cool and it's great to talk about in one-off, fashion, virtual reality, augmented reality. I, read a story a couple of years ago. Walmart was already introducing virtual reality into training regimes for new store associates. Why? They had a problem. You didn't want to have fleets of new hires walking up and down, cluttering Walmart's aisles, watching shoppers shop. Right?
Yes.
So, and also, what does the prospective employee see when they're walking down those aisles? Do they see something disheveled? And do they make a motion to correct it? Meaning, is something stocked where it shouldn't be? In retail, you have shelf tags, and those shelf tags specify the SKU of the item and the price usually, and a few other things. Those are earmarked for those particular products. If other products are there, consumer comes to the shelf because they get used to it through repetitive behaviors. They found it there last time. They don't see it. They see something else. That creates problems for the consumer's experience. Creates problems for your store because you don't know where your inventory is anymore. It's not where it's supposed to be. It should be lined up with those shelf tags, or it should be in appropriate places in the warehouse in the back of the room. So, now we're getting into a new topic, right? Asset protection, inventory control. And so what I hope is starting to become clear is the analytics process is a journey of codependencies and can be as big and comprehensive as the models will bear and your data will enable, or it can be very, very laser focused.
And the defining factor is the technological maturity of the organization. If it's still fairly new to them, then you need to explain every aspect of the consumer and the business side as you present a relatively simple model to help get them adopted. But if they're treating all of this modeling as a given and they understand it very well, then you can go more towards the laser focused things like VR training and real-time analysis of the consumer and recommendation.
Exactly. It all comes together, and I guess the manifestation of all of which I am talking about is starting to evolve now in the engineering fields. They refer to these products, I'll call them, as digital twins of a product. Let me know if that makes sense to you. So think about the automotive testing that's going on right now for autonomous driving. The number of sensors, the speed with which data is being commuted for decisioning purposes is astronomical. And all of this has to happen seamlessly in a split second if you think about what goes on when you're driving. And all of those little elements that occur that can either create distraction, distortion in your view, distortion in your audio. You think you heard a siren, but it's not, it's your radio. Distraction, as we are learning more and more, trying to do multiple things while you're driving, like texting, or even fumbling with your GPS. can distort the ability to respond in time to a crisis, and or doesn't leave you enough time to critically assess whether or not there is a crisis, if that makes sense. I'll say it again. Your distraction takes your attention away from the analysis that is continuous while you're driving. And so you're left with a very abbreviated, discontinuous snapshot that you need to make a split-second call. Is that car coming on, going to hit me head on? Or is there something in the road I need to swerve and miss? And, if you think about it, wow, there's a lot of computational power to create autonomous vehicle driving experiences.
Yeah, so it sounds like what you're saying is Walmart and most of the automotive industry are becoming highly mature with respect to data science because they're starting to use the most advanced solutions that work.
I believe it was GE, CEO of GE, had proclaimed that they are, going to be one of the top software developers. Now, GE makes jet engines and other things. Just, chew on that for a minute. They're now going to be a leading software development company. Well, that kind of makes sense, right? It's the next chapter as their maturity curve, as they progress up their maturity curve. And, getting into this concept of digital twin, when you test an engine, and I grew up in Hartford, so I had a family who worked in Pratt & Whitney in testing aircrafts, engines. There's the physical testing of the product, and then there's the virtual testing of the product. You could not throw enough live tests at a physical engine to prove it out.
Mm-hmm.
Some of that has to go on simulated tests. And those simulated tests need to accommodate for that myriad of information that is coming at that engine every millisecond it's in operation. Every control that either a CPU is directing or a pilot is directing. It's subject to interpretation or interpreting the coordinates and triangulating multiple measurements from different wings, airspeeds, weather patterns, flight itinerary, weight on board. And so, if you make that model too thin, too light, while you'll be able to train it and pass it, it's not going to be realistic.
So you're saying you think that GE has a good chance of becoming a top software developer because their engineers already have experience in making complex data-centered models?
That's right.
Wow.
And I would hold that as true for any manufacturer out there. They really own their proprietary processes. When I worked with Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, we built an advanced analytic capability to augment their larger customers who bought server farms and other services. They had growing needs to begin to operationalize analytics, so they built a consultancy there to accommodate their already prosperous industry consulting and information practice.
Wow.
And IBM, with the advent of Watson and the acquisition, IBM was going through acquiring data-rich companies like the weather company, like some of their medical or healthcare related organizations that had vast data stores, databases of MRI readings. Can you imagine, hundreds, thousands of readings of knees that have undergone MRIs, and then be able to attach to that data, being cautious to retain personal identity, and devoid of that, but to understand if somebody was an athlete, begin to attribute that data further. What sport? Begin to attribute that data further. What were they doing at the time of the accident? What was their training regimen leading up to that? The data that is now available, we are only starting to begin to understand what is possible. It's as if someone were to have provided you a tremendous toolkit, but you had no lumber, right? So say and that was kind of silly. Let me back that one up. Cut. Let's just imagine, you're a carpenter or a craftsman. What's the difference between those two? You're a carpenter, you're a craftsman. You make fine cabinetry and furniture, or you do stud work and volume, framing out new developments. And this is non-judgmental between the roles. They're fantastic roles. The skills, however, are different. And a craftsman, to do their job, they need certain tools. They can't just have a hammer and a saw and a drill.
Yes.
Right? They need specialty tools. They need specialty wood or specialty materials to work with, because if they're going to put this effort in, then they want to be sure they're going to deliver the finest finished product that brings out all of the unique attributes of that wood and the qualities desired. I'll draw that analogy now to data. If I'm an analytics guy, I'm more akin to the craftsman. If I'm a BI guy, I'm more akin to the former description, the one who is dealing in high volume with very low rough out build. And so the tools I need are different. I don't need expensive precision tools. Precision's nice, don't get me wrong, as long as it falls within the right tolerance for the job. But I think you see where I'm going. We don't explain analytics that way. We don't gradate. We tend to lump everything in under this bucket that now receive the tag of data scientist. hate that term. It's like big data. What does it mean?
So that's the risk why some companies are failing. Their data scientists are failing because they aren't clearly defining what they want, whether they really want a business intelligence person or somebody who can deeply understand the analytics.
That's right. They don't know what they need, and when they get it, they don't know what they've got.
So for the people who are looking for data analytics, data science jobs, they should probably try to look at the job openings and interpret from the descriptions whether the company actually knows what they want or not, so they'll know if they're going to make a good if it's going to be a good for both parties.
Agreed. One of my recommendations would be, there's a number of languages out there, and I think we often hear the buzz when you hear data science focused on languages. And this is just my personal point of view, right or wrong. I've been around a while, grew up on SAS, which is now relegated to regulated industries because of its standardization, in my belief, and traceability. Although open source is getting there, with some providers embellishing some of those capabilities for purpose. But you hear of R, you hear of Python, you hear of Scala, what's Hadoop. These are all terms you need to be conversant in if you're coming into the industry, but you also need to maybe spatially map it out in how these tools solve problems. What problems do these tools solve? If I'm building, a simple structure, let's say, I'll go back to the carpentry example. I'm building a doghouse. If I'm building a doghouse, I don't need to necessarily go out and buy a ton of power equipment. I could probably get through it, with some hand tools. And it's rough enough, and my dog doesn't care. And time-wise, it'll take me longer to go out and acquire and set up and learn the new tools and the technologies to build it that way. Now, that's a simple case. Now I'm in the doghouse business. Well, it depends. I mean, my wife, I'm always in the doghouse, but I'm in the doghouse business, and I want to produce thousands of these. Well, guess what? I need to change my production strategy. And so finding the tools that allow the speeds needed are going to be much more important versus hiring 100 of me or 1,000 of me to do this all by hand. Then I need 1,000 handsaws and 1,000, Right?
Not practical.
Yeah, linear extrapolation, not exactly right, but well. So I don't know, does that kind of make sense in your mind?
So it sounds like it's best if we know all the languages for when we're looking in our job search, all the relevant languages like Python and Hadoop and everything. But maybe if we're looking at the organization's languages requirements on the job title, then we'll have a better idea of what types of problems we would be solving. Is that what you're...
Exactly. And I would be cautious to any job that asks for the proverbial unicorn, right?
Everything. When they're asking for everything, they're probably not really knowing what they want.
They do not know. They want to be ready for anything they need. That's fair. But the reality is you're not doing that. And so I think it does a disservice to both the employee and the employer. One, it reflects the employer on the employer. Ugh. Sorry, it's Friday, and is it Friday? Yeah, it is Friday. It reflects badly on the employer in that they haven't thought through what it is they're really trying to accomplish. And maybe for good reason they can't, disclose their mission statement for the role, for confidentiality reasons. But there are some blocking and tackling advanced analytics approaches that are commonplace across any and every industry. And, it had been, so for example, we talked about consumer packaged goods, pricing elasticity, cross elasticity. If my competition takes price, do I follow? Is it to my advantage to reduce my price, go the other way and steal volume? If they're promoting, should I promote? Or am I just subsidizing all of my volume and just giving away margin? I'll sell the same volume. Maybe I'll sell more. It all is going to be objectives, dependent on your objectives. So analytics is a tool set. Analytic, whether you're dealing with machine learning, which is not necessarily programming, there's coding, but you're not prescriptively telling the system what it needs to do. You're merely laying out a layered, I'll call it, abstract thought process, allowing it to process numerous attributes, all of those data points that we talked about that are occurring. Let's say when you're driving, right? The visual, the audio, activity, the time dependencies. I'm late for a meeting. I'm racing. I'm in the middle of rush hour. I'm downtown, not on a country road. All of those things are being processed knowingly or unknowingly. In machine learning, it allows you to bring a lot of that context into play and relate it to outcomes. And you train the model much like you learn, right? So think about when you were young and you're growing up and you saw a dog for the first time and you point to the dog and you say, "Cat?" And your mother says, "No, that's a dog," right? And this is your, let's say your neighbor's dog. So it's the same dog every day. Boom, boom, boom. Cat? No, dog. Cat? No, dog. Dog? Yes, good job. Very similarly, that's how machine learning training occurs. And you can quickly see as I run through this exercise, if all of that child sees is the neighbor's dog, and then, mom takes him to a dog pound to pick out his own dog someday. He doesn't know what those other animals are. You got big ones, small ones. He kind of has maybe an inferential idea. Doesn't really get it. So when you think about machine learning and what it can bring to the business, I'm finding most underutilize its power. Most underestimate what's involved in the training and the thought process that needs to occur in your selection of those training sets. That is, at its core, the primary determinant of whether or not you'll be successful.
So some of the less experienced organizations they've tried to cut corners in the past on the training data, and then they achieved bad results. So now they underestimate the capabilities of machine learning, but machine learning is more powerful than they think as long as they feed it the right data.
Right. And for it to handle that amount of data, though, you do need a considerable amount of processing power. And there are techniques and technologies that allow that. Distributed computing, the availability of cloud, which does have some challenges depending on the latencies of your communications in what's being run in the cloud versus locally. But not to get down that path. Understanding that, though, is very important for you to choose the right methodology to address the problem.
Speaking of that, I'm wondering, in your experience, you for instance, you've said that when we're creating these solutions, it depends. We should create them with the consumer and also the corporate customers and also the corporate leadership in mind to create a solution that can most likely be implemented and have a good chance of creating business value. But in your experience, have there been other times when even if you reach the implementation stage and you felt that everything involved in creating that model was acceptable, but once you reach the implementation stage, there was some kind of failure in the development ops project?
Yes. So I'll go back to earlier in my career. Two stories, and I'll try to keep them brief because I know we're tight on time. My first price elasticity model we were conducting for the new emerging bottled water category, right? One, it was just astounding anybody would pay for water back then. If you were in on that era, you're like, oh my God, my grandparents would flip in their grave, right? But now it's pervasive and clogging our oceans with plastic, but that's another point. price elasticity model, the amount of time, I can remember this vividly, working on the precision of the model. And it was a simple regression model, not to get very particular, but I was determined to get to 99.999% confident that my estimate was the best estimate. And I think young, emerging, practitioners lose this point. One, when you're hired for a role, it's expected you kind of know your stuff, right? And many organizations today are, rightfully so, I believe, testing out incoming employees for certain functional capabilities and judgment and experience. I spent all night. I mean, worked through the night. It was like I was fresh out of college, so I'm used to all-nighters, and I'm going to get this thing right. So the marginal value, as an economist, comes into question. How much value am I really creating by taking this from 95% confident to 99.9? And I never got there. Somewhere in the middle was the best I got. Mm-hmm. And went ahead and presented to the client. Now, this particular elasticity, it was moderately elastic, which means if they're going to take price, they're going to see a moderate loss in volume sales, right? So they'll get more dollar per unit, but they will sell fewer units. Conversely, if they were to take price down, if your margin plays favorably, then that sometimes is a very good strategy to pump your bottom line numbers up. In this case, it was virtually indifferent. And so think about this, spending all night, the night before, you're exhausted, to change the 100th decimal of an estimate that had literally no material impact on the outcome. Is just wasted time. And you learn those only by doing, right? It's inherent. Every junior analyst is going to go through those cycles where they're so hung up on the how they got to the answer. They forget about what the answer's intended to provide. And in most cases, it's only guidance.
Yeah, if you're just providing guidance, then 4% is really inconsequential.
Yes. And so on the other end of the equation, right? So the receiving end, the business customer, they have a vague understanding of analytics. They've been through their MBA program. They've taken stats. They may have taken econometrics. They've done regression modeling on a basic level, maybe more advanced. They perceive it as a black box because they never really quite got it, in school, or it's been so long they don't really feel that confident. So they're going to take your statement, let's say moderately elastic, and knock it down a few subjectively. It's within their rights, the CFO of that business unit or the GM of that business unit can make any assumption they want, but they use that to ground that assumption. And so where I'm going with this is organizations will not turn analytics on to full efficacy overnight. It's going to be a growing and learning process. And in that decision, that first one that I was just talking about, if that GM makes a decision and decides to hedge higher or hedge lower based on some other outcome they need for business reporting purposes, it's in their prerogative. At the end of the year, or 3 months in, or 6 months in, we can go back and remeasure and see whether or not their judgment call was, more aligned to the outcome versus the pragmatic analytic outcome. That is the beginning of your feedback loop learning cycle. And you need to go through that 2, 3, 4, 5 times, I would say, with someone who is working with you. a GM who is willing to take the walk with you and learn and adjust and adapt and agilely, change their process. And I won't, kid you. It takes a little bit of luck. Sometimes you get the right answer, if you will, in the mind's eye of the executive, and they love you, right?
Mm.
That's exactly what I thought. You're brilliant. Thank you. And you're off and go about your next project. The harder conversation, and this is my second point, this is probably 3 months in to my role at a CPG firm. I'll keep names out. There was an ad that had run that I was measuring, and it was the first quarter the ad had run. There are very limited data. So when there's limited data, you got to be very precise about how you structure that data for analysis without, enacting your own biases. But I felt comfortable. What I was seeing was real. And it told me this campaign bombed. It drove incremental volume, right? The measure of a campaign, by the way, is typically measured at the market level. Mm-hmm. And, you look at the population relative to the amount of effort or GRPs going into that market and the frequency and penetration of your target based on how it was bought. And it says how much incremental volume you would not have otherwise received had you not advertised.
Wow.
That was a very modest increase. Now, this is the thing. I got those results following our quarterly all-company meeting. And this company did a great job. Every quarter would have everybody gather and walk through the financials and the wins and the losses and all that. Well, in this one meeting I got out of, this particular ad that I measured happened to win a Clio award.
Wow.
Right? So now I've got the brand director on stage with the general manager and the president of the company, and they're all high-fiving and running the ad. And I'm looking at my boss at the time. I was a junior guy, shrugging my shoulders. He just smirked, and we went about our business. So the following day when the results came out, I was pretty nervous about sharing it, but spent an extra couple of days actually trying to come at it in different ways, right? Like I said, as long as you understand the principle of what you're trying to measure, your methodology of choice is up to you. I think you have more command and flexibility. So I was triangulating different methods of measurement, and they all pointed to the same thing. So I broke the news. Almost got thrown out on my ear. My credibility in the organization was immediately crushed. Didn't know what I was doing. And I was broken. And if anybody's listening to this and has been through it, keep your chin up. Story gets better. So the next quarter came around, and funny thing is, the business never really took off on that particular brand. Yet the ad was still running. And we ran the analysis again. It reinforced it. Now we had more data. Okay, reinforced it. Now we got some attention. Now I got the VP of marketing involved. He said, okay, we're going to give some credence to this. So what alternatives are there, right? Because an answer with no action is just an answer, right? Mm-hmm. You need to do something with it. So how do you motivate analytics to action? We looked at comparable ads that they've run historically and found one that really worked. And it wasn't necessarily stale, in terms of marketing terms, and it hadn't run its course. They just wanted something fresh, new ad agency, they get paid on, designing wonderful copy, and they do. However, copy doesn't sell, messaging sells. And it was beautiful copy, the one that, won the Clio award. I loved it. Didn't sell. Why? I couldn't remember the brand it was advertised. And I bet most of you out there listening can that comes to mind. That was a great ad. What was it for again? And so that's what we were getting at. That's what the model was trying to tell us. We didn't know it until we spent time with it. You see where I'm going? And every subsequent quarter for 3 quarters, produced more and more evidence that this was not working. Now, sometimes non-analytical data supports you. Hopefully it does. Intuitively, it makes more sense to the leaders who are making decisions if you're telling them their campaign failed, but they're growing their business. Well, okay, what does that mean?
So in this case, you're saying that you had a model to determine the effectiveness of a given ad, but the management, and you were trying to drive that model through the management to help drive decisions about what ads to use, but they were so attached to that given model that it ended up taking 3 iterative quarters. In the first quarter, they basically ignored you, and they almost wanted to fire you, but you kept you stuck with it and kept a good attitude. And then the second quarter, they started to understand that maybe it wasn't solving the problem, and you had also come up with a potential solution, but they were still kind of against that solution because it wasn't as exciting as what they had initially chosen. So then it took all the way until the third quarter, 3 iterations of working with these people to successfully adopt something that could help drive business success.
That's right. And that is where or what I'm referring to about having a good lay of the land of the maturity of the organization, right? In its willingness to accept data-driven insights and results. Almost invariably, most models tell the truth if they're designed properly with data that is representative of the system. And when I say representative of, I mean geographically granular. Is it in the right time frame? Is it weekly, monthly, daily, minute, hour, second? You can see how those parameters will change based on what it is you're trying to measure. If you're trying to measure advertising, historically, advertising was only measured at the DMA level, or the designated market level. So, New York Metro, for example, right? And so you'd run a campaign, New York Metro, and I couldn't tell you much more than in that area, we feel that advertising drove, say 5% growth. Okay. But if you come back and say, okay, Bill, great. I ran 30-second spots and I ran 60-second spots. We had a couple of franchise ads, that were just speaking to the entirety of the brand, not a specific item. What worked better? Unless I have data on that, and unless I have the effort by those breaks, by those days, I really have no way of helping them. And I point that fact out because for the businesses that don't firmly understand analytics, that halos back on the analytic competency in kind of a negative way sometimes. Because they don't understand it's not about, your analytic prowess. It's about the availability and accuracy and consistency of the data.
Wow. So I think you've given us quite a bit of useful information to think about, and I think these are things that will help people who are starting out, who are interested in getting into analytics as the economy becomes more centered on data. And thank you so much for those insights.
You're welcome.
Just have a couple more questions. I think one thing I'd be interested to understand is, taking those experiences and then transitioning from helping to sell all these solutions and create all these solutions for all these customers. Now you've gone into a chief information officer role. How
Mhm.
how has your so now you're focusing more on the vision, the corporate you're focusing on the corporate vision even more. So how has your vision and how have your objectives changed
Sure,
stepping into that role?
sure. The transition isn't perfectly seamless. The CIO role, Chief Information Officer role, has evolved over the years. People, are more familiar with Chief Technology Officer. And what I found in my research before moving into that position was the definitions vary by organization based on their need, their state, their level of maturity, oftentimes. So the way I viewed my role, and the company viewed the role, was to establish and govern the evolution of a holistic approach to data as an asset for the organization. So that meant monolithic type solutions around ERP. As we looked at those, we would want to make sure we could get out of that, when the time is appropriate, what we needed to integrate into a more broader holistic view of the business model. So if we needed transaction data, P&L data for an organization, and what I'll call level of effort data for marketing and for sales and for R&D, getting those aligned with similar KPIs where appropriate, getting those aligned with similar data definitions where appropriate, hierarchies of the data structure where appropriate, by putting that forethought up front as you were building out the scalability of this data infrastructure for the organization, allowed flexibility, allowed for further and future experimentation and exploration.
Wow. So even as a chief information officer, you still have to assess the culture and set your strategy based on the existing culture, but you do get more freedom to decide what kind of data to collect and what kind of modeling infrastructure to set for your data analyst employees.
That's right. That's right. I mean, I'll give you a simple analogy, right? How do you get your weather? I'll ask you the question, Tyler.
The cell phone, usually. Right. There's an app on the cell phone that shows me the weather.
So you've got, and there's other ways to get the weather, right? You can, you've got the app. The app happened to be free, maybe. Maybe yes. You want a little more precision because you're a beekeeper, or you've got a hobby. I used to sail, and you used to really want to understand, wind shifts and velocities and currents and tides, and so so it depends on your need, right? What is it you want to analyze? What's the risk of getting it wrong, right? If I go outside today, really all I want to know is, do I need a coat or a jacket to go to work? Risk of getting it wrong, I can live with it. I'm not going to spend a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of effort worrying about the weather. If I'm heading out for a vacation and I want to know what to pack, what to bring, my wife and kids, I want to prepare them for activities. A little more investments involved in that, right? I've got a lot more riding if I get that wrong, if I don't have a fallback plan during a rain out. So I'm willing to spend a little bit more, and that manifests in different ways, but I may acquire more detail. Timing. When do I need to know? Can I wait till the evening news? It's 6 a.m. I'm getting up, getting ready for work. Yeah, for a couple of reasons, maybe because I know the scenario. It'll be closer to the time I'm leaving. it'll be more relevant. Applying local knowledge, what you know about that weather system, if you will. So when you're considering applying analytics to a scenario, there's got to be an ROI. The juice has to be worth the squeeze. And analytics, for analytics' sake, is a non-starter in any industry, any business. The only time it works, and marginally, is when you're practicing or learning. And I say marginally because the material itself, learning the pragmatics of, I call it the mathematical gymnastics of analysis, right? You're pivoting, you're flipping, you're flopping, you're dividing, you're transforming. So you get through the gymnastics, that's great. What are you going to do with it? What's the risk of getting it wrong? How much you want to pay to avoid that risk? And when do you need it by, right? And so those are kind of the parameters that drive any analytic endeavor, whether you're a consultant or an in-house. Can I squeeze my people to just add this manual routine to satisfy today? And that occurs over and over and over and over again. And that works really well when teams stay together. But teams don't stay together anymore. We've moved to this notion of matrix organizations. We've moved to the notion of the gig economy, of using vendors to run analytics. Probably one of the more challenging things I think any organization to do is to shop analytics based on price and vendor. It doesn't make any sense to me why you would go out and have somebody measure something once because they were cheaper than something else, right? Let's say you're measuring advertising and you're a $1 billion company. If you're a $1 billion company in consumer goods, you're probably advertising and your trade or your promotional spend about 25% of that. You got $250 million at risk.
So at this point, you're much more focused on things like key performance indicators, the cost of a model. You have to focus on those things much more than, and you let the lower people decide how they're going to communicate with the businesses, the customer, and the within your organization. You're the one that focuses now on the profit and loss, what you're willing to invest in these people and their solutions.
That's right. Helping them think through and strategize and build a roadmap. Most companies who, when I was with IBM or HP, they were enamored with analytics, right? They read a bit here, attended a webinar, we were at a trade show. So now they're exploring it. One thing I caution organizations around is you can't jump to advanced analytics if you don't have the fundamentals in place. And what I view, and this is my personal view, as the fundamentals is a system of data capture and governance for those critical behaviors that you are retaining. Most companies, it's, it evolves around the financials of the business and the supply chain of the business in the manufacturing processes.
So the data capture is getting much easier. It's like add more sensors and send it to a server, but could you say a little something about the governance really quick?
Sure. When data is, when I talk about data governance, it's validation. And some systems invariably, because of the volumes they're processing, they're going to have errors in recording data. You're going to have empty spaces. You're going to have gibberish. It's just a function of some of the processes and technologies and the way data is moved. Reconciling that data is really important to identify and remove those items or fill them, replace them with a viable proxy are kind of common, but there's other ways to do it. How you fix that data is going to impact what you're going to be able to do with that data down the road. So what many organizations do is keep that atomic level data, all the nits, gnats, and bugs, and quickly try to assess what's the minimum required data, because it gets very expensive, as you can imagine, to store tremendous volumes. So narrowing it down is important. Another way companies make way for storing lots of data is aggregation. Aggregation is a problem for a lot of the higher end analytics. Aggregation is really a simplification, but I heard this and I repeat it all the time. If you run your business by averages, ergo business intelligent dashboards, reporting dashboards, if you run the business by averages, you get average results. And so if you're running it on precision, you get better results. You get more precise results. It doesn't come right away. It requires a lot of change. And so that, what I call the last mile. Most companies engage, they have an idea, they've got a strategy around what they want to do. They want to improve the customer experience. Big buzz now, right? They can do it through digital means, through call center means, at the shelf means, and one-on-one contact via cell phone. 20 years ago, you can never conceive of that level of detail without spending tremendous amounts of money to have people give you all that information. Think about that. Now it's passively gathered. But we also, in recent times, discovered that what we can do with seemingly unrelated pieces of data on a particular consumer can paint some very compelling profiles that, in the wrong hands, can be misused.
Great. Well, I think you've given us a lot to think about, and I think it's definitely going to help many people in their career pursuits. So we're about out of time now, and I just wanted to say thanks again, Bill, for taking the time to share this information. And I also wanted to ask if you had any last few things or interests or pieces of information that you'd like to share with us before we wrap this up.
Absolutely. Well, one, thank you, Tyler, for inviting me on. This was, I know we talked once before, and it's been a good ongoing conversation, and hope it's achieved your objectives. But always open to opening up any of the topics as the need arises. For those, I would offer, who are looking to getting into an analytic-based career, or shifting careers away from, maybe something that is running in parallel, but you find yourself more analytically minded. You really want to get under the hood on things, and you've got some ideas you want to explore. There's a site I tend to refer anyone and everyone to. It's called datasciencecentral.com, I believe. Vincent Granville had put this out. I came across it, maybe 10 years ago, maybe not that long ago. One of the most comprehensive sites to maintain a bead on what are the analytic processes that are commonplace. If you're looking for tutorials, what I'll call cheat sheets, to coding. If you're trying to get into Python or R or some of the other languages for your projects, great resource. Strongly recommended. Another thing I would recommend is consider this. As a modeler, as an analyst, you've got a lot of power in driving the outcomes and interpreting those outcomes. It's really all you. And we're seeing more and more, particularly in the area of artificial intelligence, we're seeing topics being raised around ethical considerations. We're going to see a lot more of this. IEEE is doing a great body of work on that. I also was fortunate enough to work with some really brilliant people at Columbia University last year. I was sponsor, mentor, if you will, on one of their graduate school cornerstone projects. And the students there, you can access that report online. It's called Best Practices and Policies for an Ever More AI-Dependent World, and contrasts and compares common solutions in healthcare, in consumer, in warfare, and several others across 4 or 5 regions, including the U.S., North America, Europe, Asia, is broken down a bit in finer detail. What's remarkable about that is not everybody is in the same place. There are certain regions that are more open to, artificial intelligence and the values that it brings, and less concerned with the ethics. And there are others that are vehemently opposed. And it's a great primer for anyone who is interested in the rapidly emerging topics that are commonplace in most of the sites today. Go check that out at Columbia University.
Great, thank you. And if anyone wants to contact you with more questions, is there?
Yeah, please reach out. You can find me on LinkedIn, Bill Lombardi. Just type Bill Lombardi Phoenix. My LinkedIn is Bill Lombardi, BILLOMBARDI. And you will find me. LinkedIn, and please send me a note, and happy to talk, time permitting, and or point you to the right resources that will get you on your way.
Great, thank you so much, Bill. Have a great day, and thanks to the audience for listening. I think this is going to help everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks, Tyler. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.